The first time I saw them together, I felt nothing but joy. David had his arm casually draped over Rebecca's shoulder as they laughed at something on her phone. My husband and my best friend of 20 years, getting along so well. What could be more perfect? What's so funny? I asked, setting down the tray of mimosas I'd prepared for our Sunday brunch, tradition the three of us had maintained for nearly 5 years, ever since Rebecca's divorce. Nothing, they said in unison, both straightening slightly. Rebecca slipped her phone into her pocket with practiced ease. Inside joke, David added, with a smile that, in retrospect, didn't quite reach his eyes. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a husband who genuinely enjoyed spending time with my friends, and a best friend who had become like family. Rebecca had been my roommate in college, my maid of honor, the godmother to our son, and my anchor through every crisis of adulthood. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women are, all long limbs and easy laughter, brilliant and successful as the creative director at her advertising firm. But never once had I felt threatened by her, not once, until much later. To friendship, I said, raising my glass, completely blind to what was happening right before my eyes. They clinked their glasses against mine. To friendship, they echoed, exchanging a glance I didn't catch. That was February. By June, my life as I knew it would be shattered. The signs were there, of course. They always are. When you look back with the cruel clarity of hindsight, David working later than usual, Rebecca canceling our weekly lunch dates, new clothes, new cologne, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of our home, a charge in the air I couldn't quite identify. Small things, insignificant on their own. Together, a devastating pattern I was too trusting to see. Caroline, you're being paranoid, my sister told me over the phone when I finally voiced some vague concerns. David adores you, and Rebecca, she would never. You're her person. I believed that. With every fiber of my being, I believed in the sanctity of my marriage and the loyalty of my oldest friend. That belief was the foundation upon which I had built my entire adult life. The discovery came not as a dramatic confrontation or a caught in that moment, but through something so mundane it was almost insulting. A shared cloud photo account that David had forgotten to unlink from our home computer. I was searching for vacation photos to make a family album when I saw them dozens of images of David and Rebecca together in her apartment. In a hotel room I didn't recognize. On a weekend when he'd told me he was at a conference in Chicago and she'd claimed to be visiting her parents in Boston. There they were, smiling for selfies in places they had no right to be together, their bodies pressed close, their expressions holding the unmistakable glow of new love, the same glow David and I had shared 16 years ago when we first met. My hands shook so badly I could barely click through the photos. Each new image was another blow, another confirmation that the two people I trusted most in the world had constructed an elaborate framework of lies around me. Had they laughed about it during our brunches? Had they exchanged knowing looks across my dinner table, while I, oblivious, poured more wine? I sat there for hours, the screen eventually going dark as the computer went to sleep. When it did, I caught my reflection pale, stunned, a woman I barely recognized. I had always thought that if something like this ever happened, I would rage, throw things, confront them immediately with righteous fury. Instead, I felt a cold, clinical detachment settle over me, as if I were observing someone else's tragedy from a safe distance. I didn't call David. I didn't text Rebecca. Instead, I went upstairs to our bedroom, the room where we had slept side by side for 14 years, where we had conceived our son, where I had nursed David through pneumonia, and where he had held me through my father's death. And I began to pack his things. Dress shirts he'd worn 2 countless date nights, the cufflinks I'd given him on our 10th anniversary, the worn t-shirts he slept in. All of it went into suitcases and boxes with a methodical precision that surprised me. Somewhere, in a part of my mind cordoned off from this mechanical task, a voice was screaming, but I couldn't hear it yet, wouldn't let myself hear it. When David came home that night, the suitcases were waiting by the door. So was I, seated calmly on the stairs, our son safely away at an overnight school trip. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes darting from the luggage to my face. "Are we going somewhere?" "No," I said, my voice strangely steady. "You are." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "Care, I can explain." "Don't call me that," I interrupted, the nickname he'd given me early in our relationship suddenly unbearable. "And don't insult me by lying anymore." What followed was a conversation so surreal I sometimes wonder if it actually happened. David alternated between denial, confession, blame, and desperate pleas. It had been going on for 7 months. It had started as just friendship. They hadn't meant for it to happen. They had tried to end it multiple times. They felt terrible about the deception. "Do you love her?" I asked, the question cutting through his rambling excuses. The pause before he answered told me everything. "I don't know," he finally said, which was worse somehow than a simple yes. "I'm confused." "Well," I replied, standing up, "I'm not. Get out." He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, the first tears finally breaking through my shock. "Don't," I warned. "Don't touch me." After he left I watched him drive away with his hastily packed life in the back of his car. I sat on the kitchen floor and called the one person I always turned to in crisis. My finger hovered over Rebecca's name in my contacts for a long moment before I remembered, with a fresh wave of grief, that she was part of the crisis now, the architect of my pain. Instead, I called my sister, who arrived an hour later with wine and fury and unwavering loyalty. "How could they?" she kept saying, pacing my kitchen while I sat numbly at the table. "How dare they? How indeed?" That was the question that kept me awake for weeks afterward. How could the 2 people who knew me best, who claimed to love me most, conspire to deceive me so thoroughly? What flaw in me had driven my husband to seek comfort in my best friend's arms? What kind of woman betrayed someone she had called a sister for 2 decades? I didn't confront Rebecca. She tried calling me the day after David left. Presumably he had told her what happened, but I let it go to voicemail. Then she began texting, long paragraphs of apology and explanation that I read with the same detached curiosity. One might feel reading a particularly unbelievable work of fiction. "I never meant for this to happen," she wrote. "It just did, and by the time we realized what was happening, it felt too big to stop. I know you'll never forgive me, but you have to know how sorry I am, how much I hate myself for hurting you." Self-hatred wasn't enough, I decided. Not nearly enough for what they had done. The weeks that followed moved with glacial slowness. I told my 10-year-old son a sanitized version of events, that Dad and I were taking some time apart, that we both loved him very much, that none of this was his fault. I didn't mention Rebecca's role. He would learn that soon enough, I was sure, when they inevitably went public with their relationship. The thought of them together, openly, perhaps eventually building a life that included my son part-time, sent me to the bathroom to vomit more than once. Friends and family rallied around me with casseroles and concern, with offers to slash tires and spread rumors. I declined the latter, though not without some temptation. The narrative of what had happened spread through our social circle like a particularly virulent virus, with people taking sides and whispering behind closed doors. Some blamed David entirely, the cheating husband, tale as old as time. Others seemed to find Rebekah's betrayal more unforgivable. A few, to my horror, suggested that I must have been blind not to see what was happening under my own roof. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps some part of me had known and chosen not to see. Or perhaps trust is simply a choice we make, a necessary vulnerability without which love cannot exist. Whatever the case, I found myself adrift in a life I no longer recognized. David moved into an apartment across town and took our son every other weekend as if we were any ordinary divorcing couple. Rebekah quit her job and moved to another city, whether out of genuine remorse or to be closer to wherever David might eventually settle, I didn't know and couldn't bring myself to care. The divorce proceedings were as civilized as such things can be, which is to say, still agonizing. We divided our shared life with mathematical precision: the house, the savings, the furniture we'd chosen together, the future we had planned. I kept catching myself thinking I should tell Rebekah about this, before remembering that she was gone from my life to a double amputation that left me permanently off balance. 6 months after Discovery Day, I ran into them at a restaurant in a neighboring town where I'd gone with my sister for a change of scenery. They were seated in a corner booth, not touching, both looking somehow diminished. Whether they were still together or meeting to pick through the ruins of their affair, I couldn't tell. Rebekah saw me first, her face draining of color. David followed her gaze and froze. I did not make a scene. I did not throw water in their faces or append their table. I simply looked at them for a long moment, these two strangers who had once been my world, and then I turned and walked out, my dignity intact but my appetite gone. In the car, my sister ranted and raved enough for both of us, while I sat quietly, surprised by my own calm. "Are you okay?" she finally asked as we pulled into my driveway. "No," I answered honestly, "but I think I will be." And slowly, incrementally, I was. The pain didn't disappear, rarely does, but it transformed from an acute, unbearable agony into something I could carry, a dull ache that occasionally flared but no longer defined my every waking moment. I learned things about myself in that first year of aftermath. I learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I learned that forgiveness isn't a single act, but a daily choice, one I sometimes made and sometimes didn't. I learned that it's possible to miss someone desperately, while simultaneously never wanting to see them again. Most importantly, I learned that betrayal, devastating as it is, need not be the end of the story. 2 years after my world imploded, I took my son to his first day of middle school. As we approached the building, I saw David waiting near the entrance. It was his week with our son, but we had agreed to both be present for this milestone. He looked older, more tired, but at the sight of our boy, his face lit up with the same love it always had. "Hi," he said cautiously when we reached him. "Hi," I replied, and was surprised to realize that the sight of him no longer sent poison through my veins. Our son, embarrassed by our presence, as only a preteen can be, quickly made his escape into the building after extracting promises that we would not, under any circumstances, attempt to hug him in front of his new classmates. Left alone, David and I stood awkwardly on the sidewalk. "How are you?" he asked finally. "I'm good," I said, and meant it. "Really good, actually." He nodded, seeming genuinely pleased. "I'm glad, Caroline. You deserve that." We didn't speak of Rebecca. I had heard through mutual friends that their relationship had ended less than a year after it began, collapsing under the weight of guilt and distrust. I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a vague sadness for all the destruction left in the wake of their choices. As I walked back to my car that morning, I thought about the woman I had become, a woman tempered by betrayal, but not defined by it. The whispers behind closed doors had nearly destroyed me, but in their aftermath, I had found a voice that was entirely my own. Sometimes now, in quiet moments, I remember the three of us at those Sunday brunches, laughing, comfortable, connected. I think about how fragile happiness is, how easily trust can be broken, how the people we love most have the greatest capacity to hurt us. But I also think about resilience, about the human heart's remarkable ability to heal, to love again, to find joy in unexpected places. Rebecca sent me a letter on what would have been our 25th friendship anniversary. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope and nearly threw it away unopened. But curiosity, or perhaps some deeper need for closure, led me to read it. "I know I have no right to contact you," she wrote, "but I want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret what I did to you. You were the best friend I ever had, and I destroyed that in the most unforgivable way possible. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know that you were never the problem. The flaw was in me, not you. I hope you're happy, Caroline. I hope you've found peace." I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. But I kept the letter tucked away in a drawer where I rarely look, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof of my survival. The whispers behind closed doors had tried to define me as a victim, as the deceived wife, the betrayed friend, but I had refused that definition. Instead, I had written my own story, one of strength, of renewal, of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed, but undefeated. And in that story, those whispers were just a chapter, not the conclusion. The rest was still waiting to be written, one quiet, honest day at a time.